All right, we're talking about arranging music for younger players today because I think this is something that I've learned about writing music for non-professionals that I think is very useful to remember for anybody that's writing music that's not, the LA Philharmonic, the New York Philharmonic, the Boston Symphony Orchestra, the National Symphony Orchestra, not one of the major symphony orchestras, even though I think that's kind of the way that people learn how to write. That's at least how I learned how to write music when I was in college. Hey, I'm Isaac Schanno Johnson. If you don't know me, I'm a musician, composer, producer, and I make videos about all that fun stuff, music composition, music production, so make sure you hit that subscribe button to see videos like this in the future. Okay, so make the music easier than you think you need to is what I might title this video, because I think that's sort of the general idea of what I'm going to say is make it much easier than you think you need to. I've been writing music or arranging music for a youth orchestra that I direct, and it's orchestra students, violin, viola, cello, saxophone, flute, clarinet, students that have been playing for maybe 3 to 5 years on their instrument. And that's not a whole lot of time compared to professional players, but this same thing could be said about high school players too, because they're not professionals. I think it could probably even be said about some college players, college level orchestra players, because they're not at the same level of the New York Philharmonic. The majority of them aren't, and almost all of them aren't, because if they were, they'd probably be playing in the New York Philharmonic. But whatever, most of them, aren't at that level yet. And writing music that is something I would write for the New York Philharmonic or the Boston Symphony Orchestra isn't going to work, and it's going to be way too hard for them to be playing, and it's way too hard for them to play in a concert well enough to make the music sound good. And with my specific players, most classical symphonies are too difficult for them to play, right? They can't really play any of the Beethoven symphonies or the Brahms symphonies, or I don't know if they'd be able to play a full Mozart symphony. They could probably play sections, but those pieces are still too difficult for them to play. So if I'm arranging something myself, one, I have an advantage because those guys are dead. I'm alive. I know these specific players, so I can arrange the music to be just tailored to their level. And when I'm doing something like this, I'm thinking, okay, I need to make it easy enough for them where they're going to be able to make it sound good. Not just that it's barely playable and they can do it if they really shed every week, because I think that's it's not the expectation that I want to be putting on them, and it's not the expectation I want to have as their teacher. I don't want to tell them, hey, my expectation is that you practice this for 3 hours every day, and by the time we have the concert, it's going to sound beautiful. No, I want to give them something that can sound pretty good after 3 rehearsals, because then we can actually get it to sound really good in the concert, because we can actually focus on stuff and they'll be able to hear these different things that we're trying to add, like dynamics and articulations, and really make them a whole lot better than just slightly staccato, a little bit legato. The reason I think this is so important, the reason I wanted to make this into a video, is because when I was at Berkeley, here's a little story. When I was at Berkeley, I studied film scoring and classical composition. In composition class, we'd be looking at, the well-known classical pieces of music. In film scoring classes, we'd be looking at the well-known pieces of film music. And those were all played by professional level players, whether those were studio musicians or symphony orchestras. Those two things were way beyond the level of even some of the players that were at the school. And I say that not as a knock on those players, but I mean that as a compliment to how amazing the musicians in, the New York Philharmonic and the Boston Symphony, and how amazing professional studio musicians are, because they are just at a completely different level than college students are. And when you learn to write by studying music that is really high level and really difficult, you end up writing music that is really high level and really difficult, and you sort of have this expectation that it's going to sound as if the New York Philharmonic played it, and the New York Philharmonic isn't playing it. Maybe they will someday. I hope they do. But I hope they play my music. Hope they play your music too. Subscribe. But if you're writing this music that's really high level and really, really difficult, then you give it to these players that aren't able to play it that well, you're kind of just going to be disappointed. And you're not setting yourself up to make the music sound good. You're not setting them up to make the music sound good. And you're just not using that sort of situation as well as you could be, when you could just write music that's slightly easier to play, that gets the same feeling you want, and give it to them, and they'll be able to make it sound really, really good. So that's why I think it's really important to point this out. I think it's especially important to point this out if you're writing for high schoolers or middle schoolers, because they're going to be at a level that's often sort of strange, where they might be really good at some things but not great at other things, right? They might be able to play amazingly in one key or a couple keys. On violin, G, D, and A are often the keys that sound really good for violin students. C major might be okay. F major is probably going to be a little iffy depending on what level you have. So the farther outside of those sort of basic skills, well, the worse playing you might hear. And I know that's not fun to say, but take those considerations into account if you're arranging something for a specific level of players, because as musicians that have, like I have, studied music at a college level, you get so good at playing in all these different keys, and after college, working as a musician, you get used to all these different keys and all these different things, and you get so used to them that you don't realize not everybody knows that stuff that well. And you can sort of get caught up and be like, yeah, sure, I'll write this in the key of D flat, it's fine. And then you give it to your middle school orchestra, and they're just like, what's D flat, right? And they're just like completely lost. You know, that's something that could happen if you're not thinking, okay, this is what the students know, this is what they're good at. I'm going to write it maybe even a little bit below that level, because it's going to be new music that's maybe unfamiliar to them, right? And I would especially do this if you're using techniques that are new for the players, right? If you're trying to teach a technique or an idea through the music, make sure everything else is fairly easy. One great way to do this is by choosing your keys really well. Choose a key that's very comfortable if you want to teach something that's a new technique for them. Choose a key that's maybe not as comfortable if the rhythms are really easy, right? If the rhythms and the speed and everything about it is really easy, then yeah, it's a great way to choose a key that you can then teach them. So you can use this as a teaching tool too, if you really want to get into that, but that's even another level, I think, a little more complicated than what we're talking about. But make the music easier than you think you need to, because when you give it to the players, you want to make sure that they're going to be sounding good, right? If you're arranging music for a specific group, arrange it for that group to sound good. Whatever level they're at is where you're going to have to write, right? You can't write a piece of music that's meant to be played and meant to be played well by the New York Philharmonic and say, yeah, here's for a high school orchestra. Yeah, here you go. You guys will sound great. You can't really do that if you're writing it for them specifically, because they're not the New York Philharmonic, and you know they might make it sound really good, but you have an opportunity when you're writing for a specific group to write specifically for that group. It does take a little bit more thought and effort than just writing a piece of music, but taking that time and effort, that extra energy, and write it specifically for that group, I think is worth it, because you'll hear it in the concert. Yeah, they sounded a whole lot better than had I just written whatever I wanted and then given it to them and seen how they did. Right? Writing for younger players and, you know, non-professional level players, you have an opportunity to make them sound really good where they are, rather than really pushing them to sound really good on this piece that's going to take them a whole lot of time to practice. You can just write a piece for them specifically and make them sound good. Might mean you have to let go of some really cool compositional ideas that you like to use or that you really wanted to use in the piece of music. Yeah, you might have to do that. But at the end concert, you as the composer, the person is whoever is the director, maybe that's you too, and the players are going to sound better as a whole if you do take that into consideration, rather than just giving them some music that's pretty hard to play. That's it. I hope you found that video useful. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you learned something about music. If you did, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and as always, thank you for watching, and I will see you next time. Peace.